Greetings and happy Sabbath. It's an honor for me to be here in front of you this Sabbath. I'm very thankful and blessed for this opportunity. And I would like to extend a welcome and a warm wishes from the Denver Church in Colorado. We all send our greetings to all of you here. And we are happy to see such a full church separated out nicely. You have quite a nice operation here. So we all send our greetings, and I'm sure you all send greetings back to us. It is good to be in fellowship, even in the middle of a pandemic, isn't it? And it's very important. People's religious freedom is very important, and it's a vital part of our society, as we do know. So let us take this time to go into the subject today entitled Run the Race. And this sermon actually I was supposed to give last Sabbath on the other coast in Southern California. We were going to have a party for my grandfather, a birthday party, but we figured since everything was just going out of control, COVID was everywhere, with all the traveling, it probably wouldn't be the best to go just attend a small little gathering there, given his age and his health. But I think this sermon still has an important fact that can touch each and every one of our hearts today, both the young and the old, as we consider the race that is brought out in Hebrews 12 and all throughout the New Testament. We'll hit a couple verses on that. Now, our key text, as we read previously, was, "Wherefore, seeing we are also compassed about with so great a cloud of witnesses, let us lay aside every weight and sin which doth so easily beset us, and let us run with patience the race that is set before us." Before we talk about the race set before us, before we just read through these Bible verses, I want us to understand where this comes from. If we don't understand the race in the ancient Greek context of which these people were grown up and living in that time, we don't really appreciate all the small, fine minutiae that a person in the Hellenistic world in that time would have. Now, the idea of Olympics, racing, athletics all started back in 776 BC when a gentleman called Coroebus supposedly sprinted to the altar of Zeus, and he was called the first Olympic victor. That was what it says in legend, the Greek legend. Since that time, as warfare became something more admired in Greece, especially in a country called Sparta, there was lots of training of soldiers within the different city-states of the Greeks. And what did these trainings involve? Throwing the javelin, the discus, wrestling, running. All of these were important things. You needed to be physically fit to go to war. So there was a great focus on physical fitness, a great focus on Olympic training, and it became so important in the Greek culture that all kinds of philosophers like Plato would make commentary on what is the best physique, what is the best talent or skill set someone would have to be an effective Olympian, an effective fighter. Now, talking about Olympics, training, racing, all of these popular sports that we even have today, talking about this would not be complete unless we talked about the Battle of Marathon, because it took place in a place that now is named, all of our races, marathon races, are named after this battle. What is the story of the Battle of Marathon? Well, it occurred in 490 BC, so almost 500 years before Christ. And what happens is Persia was still the dominant player on the stage, okay? And Persia was pushing into Turkey, and it started to send its ships over towards Athens. And Athens was afraid. After all, they were not the most robust military Greek state at that time. It was Sparta, okay? So Athens sends someone called Thyself, in the legend of Thyself, to call and request Sparta to come and help us. The Persians are coming with all their army. Come and help us. We don't think we can hold them off. We need the help of Sparta, the true professional warriors. So Thyself runs 135 miles in 48 hours to seek the aid of Sparta. And there is a poem that Robert Browning has kind of elaborated, and it says in this poem, it says, O my Athens, Sparta loved thee. Did Sparta respond? Every face of her leered in a furrowed of envy, mistrust, malice. Each eye of her gave me its glitter of gratified hate. Gravely they turned to take counsel, to cast for excuses. I stood quivering, the limbs of me fretting as fire from an inch of dry wood. Persia has come. Athens asks aid, and still they debate. Now, I'm going to touch on the Battle of Marathon later. We're going to leave that to the end. Okay? But this man, prior to that battle, ran 135 miles to seek aid. And this has become part of the lore of runners today. The runner Thyself. You'll see him in runners' magazines all over the place. Very, very interesting story. Well, we've touched a lot on the Greeks. Where does Judea come in all of this? Well, Judea had a big dose of Greek culture. And we don't get a lot of this in the Bible because it talks about the Babylonians, the Medes, and the Persians, and then it just disappears and you have the New Testament. But if you look in some of the books, ancient Hebrew books like the Maccabees, they kind of touch on that period in between. What happened in that period? Well, what happened was Alexander, and we all know from prophecy, and they knew their prophecy back then, Alexander and the Greeks came to power, and Alexander pushed the Persians back. And as he did that, the Jews of that time in Jerusalem, they were very open to Alexander because they're like, oh yes, we know about where you are on the statue, which beast you are. You belong here. And they actually spoke some great things to him as he marched his troops through Jerusalem and in pursuit of the Persians. So the Jews and the Greeks had a very positive view of each other. But unfortunately, all of that slowly changed as Alexander passes away, and then he has his 3 generals take control. One particular in that long line of kings was Antiochus Epiphanes. And you may have heard him, you may not have, but he became the king over the region that ruled the Jews. And his big goal, his big push, like every president today, they have a plan, a goal. His big push was, you know what, I want to Hellenize all of my territory. I want to make them Greek. I want the Jews to dress like Greeks. I want them to have Greek haircuts. I want to build gymnasiums in Jerusalem and have them train like Greeks. I want Jerusalem to be a premier Greek city like Antiochus, which was his capital. So there was conflict. Some Jews, they wanted to keep their old ways, and some Jews wanted to, they liked the Greek idea. They liked the idea of sports and Olympics, and it was fun, and money, of course, goes into the city. If you follow the ruling faction of that time, you get paid, and trade comes, and wealth, and so there was big conflict. Unfortunately, Antiochus oversteps his bounds. He tries to force Jerusalem to become Hellenized, and in doing so, he profanes the temple. He spurs a revolution, the Maccabean revolt, and in the end, that just destroys his whole kingdom. He never is the same again. So we fast forward now several hundred years, and we come to Christ. A new king, a new leader is on the stage. You have the Romans. And even though the Greeks are gone, this idea of Hellenization is throughout all of Judea, all of the world at that time. There was a big Greek culture. And in this comes the stories or the writings of Hebrews 11 and 12. In all this comes the writings of Paul talking about the runner running the race. Every Hebrew at that time has an idea of what it is to run in a Greek race. What is that? What is it like? To put things in context, we're going to be spending our time really in a very small section of Hebrews 12. But I want to remind us that Hebrews 12, if you open your Bibles, is really a continuance of Hebrews 11. And what is Hebrews 11? Does anyone know in this church? Okay, it's called the Hall of Faith. The Hall of Faith. In this chapter, it talks about all the heroes. All the heroes from the very beginning, from righteous Abel to Abraham, and then it even goes into those who were quenched with fire, escaped the edge of the sword. They were destroyed by armies of aliens. But you know what? They had a hope of deliverance, a hope for a better land. And I really like what it says in Hebrews 11:12 through 13. It says, "These all died in faith, not having received the promises, but having seen them afar off." Many of them, they didn't even have Christ. They didn't have Christ die in their lifetime. This was a promise they were waiting for a long time, and they had faith. They believed it would happen. It says that, and they were persuaded of them and embraced them and confessed that they were strangers and pilgrims on the earth. Now we go to 12:1. 12:1 is really, the chapter 12 is an artificial block in the whole story and narrative of Hebrews 11. "Wherefore, seeing now we are compassed about with so great a cloud of witnesses." Who are these witnesses in Hebrews 12? This can get controversial. A lot of the Christian world like to think that this is the dead who have passed before us, like Abraham, Isaac, those in our church, waiting and watching like in a stand, watching the race. And you could say figuratively, maybe these are the uncounted masses of those who've gone before us, but I think a true reading of this, if you compare it with Hebrews 12:22 through 24, it says that ye are come to Mount Zion, unto the city of the living God, and the heavenly Jerusalem, and to an innumerable company of angels, to the general assembly and the church of the firstborn. So I think this is a heavenly scene where we have divine beings in the heavenly kingdom who have watched the plan of redemption from the foundation of the universe slowly unfold. And they've watched this hall of faith slowly march by. And now they're talking to us. And these cloud of witnesses are watching us in the race that we run. So we've unpacked who these cloud of witnesses really are. And let us dig in. To be a true runner in a Greek race, what must we do? Now, in training, I was just talking to Mikey the other day, in training for strength, in training for explosiveness and speed, you use weights, correct? But when you're in the race, are you going to use any weights? No. You're not going to use weights. Your goal is to win, and if you need to win, you need to be as light as possible. You need to be as fast as possible. You're going to lay aside every weight, as it says in Hebrews 12:1, every weight which doth so easily beset us. What are these weights? It says here, the weights and the sin. So in our daily lives, as we run this race, all of us have weight. Everyone. Even me now. All of us. Fat. It sits on us. Is it useful for anything in running a race? Nothing. You can hardly even consume it in time unless you're running a marathon, a long, long one. You can hardly even consume it in time to help you out without just completely collapsing. What you need is the bone, you need the muscle, you need the nervous system all primed and ready to go. But the fat, it's really just an impediment. It's something that slows us down. In our spiritual lives, we need to lose the fat. We need to lose the weight of sin that drags us down. And how can these be described? They can be guilt. They can be memories of the past. The times when we've done something wrong, we've done something foolish, regrets deep in our heart that we've never really forgiven ourselves for. We can be weighed down by the cares of the world. Maybe the trouble of COVID. We can be weighed down by the trouble of this country right now. Which one is the president? What is going on? Is this the beginning of the end? There are a lot of weights that in our daily lives don't do us any good. Brothers and sisters, we need to remove that weight. We need to lose that fat that so easily besets us. Envy, malice, evil thinking, evil speaking, covetousness, these are weights that the Christian must lay aside if he would run successfully the race for immortality. Every habit or practice that leads into sin and brings dishonor upon Christ must be put away. Whatever the sacrifice, the blessings of heaven cannot attend any man in violating the eternal principles of right. And here's where it's scary. One sin cherished is sufficient to work the degradation of character. And not only that, not only to lose yourself, but to mislead those around us. We indeed, in this race of life, need to lose the weight of sin. And in order to do that, if you ask any good athlete, I'll say bodybuilding for an example. They gain enormous amounts of weight, enormous amounts. But when it comes time for the show, they know where every ounce of fat comes off and when it comes off. They know that first they may lose it from the arms or their chest, and maybe the love handles are the last to go. You need to know yourself. And in our spiritual lives, we need to understand ourselves and know thyself, know our character. How does that affect us? It says here in Gospel Workers, page 276, he who understands well his own character, who is acquainted with the sin that most easily besets him, and the temptations that are most likely to overcome him, should not expose himself needlessly and invite temptation by placing himself on the enemy's ground. But so many times we know where we might be a little weak, and we step on that ground, we tread on that ground, and then we walk straight into the trap. We've been there before. Every one of us has those sins that beset us, and we know the weaknesses where we are put on unstable ground, and we step there and we say, I'll be fine this time. It could be anything. You could say that for alcoholism. You can say that for drug abuse, for anything. You know that, what, in a bar I'm weak, but then you walk straight into the bar. Any sin we have, it could be compulsive eating. Any problem we have, we need to understand and know our character well. That is the key to success. That is the key to shedding this unneeded weight. Why should we drop the weight? It's because this weight of sin has been already carried for us. It says here in Bible Echo 1892 that it was the expression of justice against the sin that crushed the life of the Son of God, crushed out the life of the Son of God. It was the weight of sin that in the Garden of Gethsemane caused him to sweat as if it were great drops of blood. So I talked about our physical and spiritual weights that we carry with us in the race that we run here on this earth. What else can we shed in order to be fast? Any ideas? We put them on every day. Clothes. We need to get naked. How was the Greek race run? It was run naked. They may wear their clothes when they're out and about. They may wear their clothes when they're training. But you need to shed your clothes in order that you can be free and unrestricted by the things of this world. What am I talking about? Well, it says here, cling so closely. That phrase, when scholars look at that, biblical scholars, to shed something that is like the encumbrance, the tight encumbrance that an athlete would experience if they were wearing their clothes in a race, in a wrestling match, in a javelin throwing match. And it's obvious. When I was a kid, when I was young, I would read these books, I'd look at these pictures, you look at the pottery. I'll pull it up right here. And it's like, why are these Greeks always running their races naked in their pottery? Why are they always fighting naked? What is going on here? And I didn't really understand the concept. I thought it was, are these people perverse? Maybe there was some of that in there. But there is something more to this. And I finally had a better understanding when I picked up Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu in undergrad. In college, I joined a Jiu-Jitsu club. And at first, you could say, how did we wrestle in Jiu-Jitsu? It was with light clothes that were very flexible, breathy. They weren't restrictive. okay? Then after a period of time, I talked with one of the people in the jiu-jitsu class, and they're like, you know what, you haven't learned jiu-jitsu until you can wrestle with a gi. And what is a gi? It's this uniform that they wear. And I don't know if any of you have ever worn a gi before, but the fabric is thick, it's strong, it cannot be torn, it's highly restrictive. And I thought, oh, this is no problem. I'm going to wrestle with the gi. It's all going to be good. I know all the tricks of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu with the gi. It shouldn't be much worse. Well, I was so wrong, because what do you see here? The man in blue, he has the lapel of his gi. It's being held. It's being held tightly. And suddenly what I realized is that with my own clothes, I could be strangled, I could be held down, I could be maneuvered in any way I wanted, in any way they wanted, and there was nothing I could do. The clothes were too strong. They were too tight. I could not free myself of my opponent. And this is how it is in our daily lives. We are restricted by our clothes. So it made sense to me, of course, in that time, all these athletics, they were performed in the nude. How can we apply this to us today? Every one of us, we put on our clothes every day. And what do our clothes do? They cover the nakedness, but they also cover the fat. They cover the sins. Isaiah 64:6 says, "But we are all as an unclean thing, and all our righteousness is as filthy rags." So every day we put on our clothes. We come to church. We go to work. And we're restricted by what we wear. Now, I'm not advocating a new type of dress reform. I'm not. But I want us to think about what clothes really mean. And when I'm talking about clothes, it's just not what we wear. It's the houses we live in. It's the cars we drive. It can even be the dress reform we have in church. It's self-righteousness. And when we carry this self-righteousness and we cover up the sins within us, we don't seem that bad. And next thing you know, I'm running my race in my nice suit, and I look around and everybody else is naked, or maybe he's in poorly clothed clothes, and I think, oh man, well, I look so much better. Will I win a race like that, restricted by my own self-righteousness? No. So, I like to think back to Eden. How was man and woman made in Eden? It says here, quote, "They were naked and not ashamed." Christ Object Lessons 3:11. "This is what the transgressors of God's law have done ever since the day Adam and Eve's disobedience. They have sewed together fig leaves to cover the nakedness caused by transgression. They have worn their garments of their own devising. By works of their own, they have tried to cover their sins and make themselves acceptable with God." It says here also, "But this they can never do. Nothing can man devise to supply the place of his lost robe of innocence." Brothers and sisters, we were in Eden. We were clothed with robes of white and innocence, and we took them off to put on our own self-righteousness. We fell and put on our own leaves. And ever since that time, we have been restricted. We've been restricted by that, and it has probably been one of our greatest snares. We need to shed our garments. Youth instructor, August 11th, 1886. "Your garments are unclean, your own spirit and habits are earthly and defiled. Jesus proposes that you lay these off and put on garments that are clean and white, which he has prepared for you. Will you lay off the self-righteous garments and accept of Jesus Christ as your own Savior? Will we take our clothes off and accept the righteousness of Christ to cover us?" This self-righteousness, it causes us to fail to realize our own guilt. It covers up, even in front of us, the own weights, the own sins that we carry. We just don't realize. We don't realize, we haven't thought, you know what? We need to be free from this encumbrance, free from a false a false clothing, a false righteousness, where those that look at us think that, you know what, Brother John, he's fine, he's running that race well. Because unfortunately, the cloud of witnesses in Christ himself, he sees us as we really are. So we must become naked so we can be cleaned. We must become naked because you cannot put clothes on top of old clothes. We must become naked to be clothed. And will Christ leave us naked? I really like Zechariah 3:3. Talks about Joshua the high priest, and there he is in all his self-righteousness, the righteousness of Israel. And he's in his filthy garments standing before the angel at the judgment seat. And it's obvious that, you know what, he is in poor condition. There is no hope. There is no hope. And the accuser is there before him, accusing him. But it says here in verse 4 that, and he, being Christ, answered and spake unto those that stood before him, saying, take away the filthy garments from him. And unto him he said, behold, I have caused thine iniquity to pass from thee, and I will clothe thee with raiment. So Christ is in the business of clothing us. He is in the business of putting his own righteousness upon us. In the case of the prodigal son, we know how the prodigal son appeared. He came to his father. He was probably half naked to start with, poorly clothed. His clothes are all in tatters. And what does his father do? He will permit no contemptuous eye to mock his son. He takes his own broad mantle, puts it on his son's wasted form. The son, realizing his sin, there is nothing to hide. He has gone to the bottom, lowest point in his life. He says, Father, I have sinned in heaven and against thy sight, and am no more worthy to be called thy son. At that time, the father says, bring forth the robes, kill the fatted lamb. So our God, he is in the business of clothing. He is in the business of protecting, of covering up, of giving us righteousness. We just need to release some of our own restrictions that so easily beset us, so easily tie us down, so easily prevent us from running the race that he designed us to run. Finally, brethren, now that we've lost the extra weight, we have taken our clothes off, now we can run the race that God has given us. It says in Hebrews 12:1, and let us run with patience the race that is set before us. And each one of us has this race. Whether we like it or not, we are here on this earth, and there are witnesses in heaven attesting to how we will run. Now, Paul speaks a lot on the race. He was a man of culture. He understood the Greek culture, and of course he was a Roman. And this was still popular in the times of Rome, the idea of racing, sports, competition. He says in 1 Corinthians 9:24 through 27, know ye not that they which run in a race run all, but one receives a prize, so run that ye may obtain. So we need to run as if there is only one prize, only one goal at the end. That is it. This is the only race of your life. There is nothing else that matters. There is nothing else that matters. Paul continues in verse 5, and every man that striveth for the mastery is temperate in all things. Now they do it to obtain a corruptible crown, an earthly prize, but we something that is incorruptible, immortal. Therefore so I run, not as uncertainty, so I fight, not as one that beateth the air. And this is an allusion to a boxer in that time. He's not boxing the air. When Paul is fighting, he fights with purpose. He fights with certainty, not uncertainty. And Paul continues, I keep under my body and bring it into subjection, lest by any means, when I have preached to others, I myself should be cast away. Talk about putting your self-righteousness in the dust. Realizing that, you know what, I am human and I can fail. And how can I preach? How can I run this race and be myself cast away? How can I be that stumbling block to the brothers and sisters around me? When we run our race in this life with patience and perseverance, there's only one place we need to be looking. When you're naked and you're running a race, do you think you're looking around? I think you want to get out of there as fast as possible. You're not looking back at the starting line where you threw your clothes down. You're not looking back there or who you might be passing. There is somebody who's run the race before us. Hebrews 12:2, looking unto Jesus, the author and finisher of our faith. So Jesus is ahead. He has finished the race before us. He's at the finish line waiting for us. And there's nothing else that matters. Our own condition, our own righteousness, at this point we just need to run and look to Jesus. Philippians 3:13 and 14. Brothers, I do not consider that I have made it on my own, but one thing I do, forgetting what lies behind and straining forward to what lies ahead, I press toward the goal for the prize of the upward call of God in Christ Jesus. So looking to Jesus, straining for the end. This is what a true runner of God should be. This is what a true Hall of Famer of faith is. Hebrews 12:2, looking unto Jesus, who is the what? The author, slain from the beginning, the foundation of this world, and the finisher, the perfecter of our faith, who for the joy that was set before him endured the cross, despising the shame, and is set down at the right hand of the throne of God. 1 Corinthians 1:7-9. Our Lord Jesus Christ, who will sustain you to the end, guiltless, clothed in his righteousness, you could say, in the day of our Lord Jesus Christ. Who is faithful? Is it me? God is faithful. So it is a real promise to me in this little race section of Hebrews 12 that though Christ was the author, he has also promised to finish, sustain, perfect us unto the very end. This is a promise for us. This is a true promise. And I am sure of this, that he who began a good work in you will bring it to completion at the day of Jesus Christ. Amen. So brothers and sisters, Christ is in the business of clothing us, perfecting us, making us more like him into his likeness. Now when we look to Christ, he ran the race before us, correct? He has run the race and he has won the race so that we have the privilege and the opportunity to run as well. Or else all would be lost, correct? All would be lost. It says here in manuscripts 111, 1879, that when Christ cried, "It is finished," God bowed his head satisfied. Now his justice and mercy could blend. He could be just and yet the justifier of all who should believe on Christ. He looked upon the victim expiring on the cross and said, "It is finished. The human race shall have another trial," another race. The one race in our life that matters. The redemption price was paid, and what happened at that time? Satan fell like lightning from heaven. We know that at the cross, the devil was limited, based off the writings of Ellen White, and from statements like this, limited to this earth. He could not go out and tempt the worlds around. He fell like lightning from heaven because the battle was lost at that point. And because of that, we have the privilege, the honor, the mercy to run the race that God has set for us. It says here that Christ laid hold the pillars of Satan's kingdom, passed through the conflict, destroying him that had the power of death. A way was now opened whereby mercy and truth could meet together. Righteousness and peace kissed each other. And by his death, Christ perfected forever them that are sanctified. So, I want to hit two things here. We are running the race and we are looking to the finisher, but at the same time, the war is won. The war is won and we are spreading good news. So in our race of life, we are spreading the gospel because Christ has torn down the pillars of Satan's kingdom. Satan has fallen like lightning out of heaven. We are now free to live unencumbered in a life that Christ will give us. So now we need to run the race and spread the good news as we go along our life's way. And Paul touched into this well in Galatians 2:2. And I, Paul, went up by revelation and communicated unto them that gospel. What is the gospel? The gospel is the good news, which I bring among the Gentiles, but privately to them which were of reputation, lest by any means I should run or had run in vain. There's Paul again. Paul being naked, saying, you know what, I have no righteousness within me. God help that I do not run in vain. But there he was, spreading the good news that, you know what, Christ has come and he has defeated all powers and principalities on this earth. That is the good news that we need to spread in our lives. We need to hold forth the word of life, that I may rejoice in the day of Christ, but that I have not run in vain, neither have I labored in vain. May our race today, brothers and sisters, be one that is not a waste. We have only one race to live, one race to run. This good news, we know it well, Revelation 14. And I see another angel fly in the midst of heaven, having what? The everlasting good news for us to preach to them that dwell on the earth, to every nation, kindred, tongue, and people. This ties in very well with a commentary from R.C. Sproul's commentary on Romans, where it talks about a lot of this race language. And we should be very familiar with this. And here this R.C. Sproul's commentary says that in ancient days, when soldiers went to battle, the people in the city would wait breathlessly for the return. An example of this is David waiting in the city when his men are fighting Absalom. And they're waiting for runners to come back, runners to report from the race. Once the outcome was known, marathon runners dashed back to give the report. That is why Isaiah wrote, "How beautiful upon the mountains are the feet of him who brings good news." The watchman in the watchtower would look as far as the eye could see into the distance. Finally, he would see dust moving as the runners sped back to the city to give the report of the battle. The watchmen were very well trained to tell by the way the runner was running. If they looked like they had been beaten and destroyed and they were just barely making it, they knew news might be bad. But if the runner was kicking up dust and running with zeal, that meant there was good news. This is the very concept of the gospel in its most rudimentary sense. We must run our race bearing the good news to the world. And here's where it ties in with the Battle of Marathon. On that day, the Athenians faced the Persians in battle, and the Spartans never showed up. They were in a festival, they were waiting for the full moon, and they said, forget it, you can take care of the Persians on your own. The Athenians faced them on the Battle of Marathon, outside of a city called Marathon, and there the Athenians destroy the Persians, halting the advance, changing world history. Because if the Persians had swung through Greece, they could have gone into Rome, and all that growing land, all those growing empires of the future would have likely been destroyed. So the battle turns, Persia is defeated, and then they turn to Thyself again. In the poem it says, "So when Persia was dust, all cried, to the Acropolis, run Thyself, one race more, the meed is thy due, Athens is saved." And Thyself, he flings down his shield, and he runs like fire once more. 25 miles from the Battle of Marathon to Athens. 25 miles, one last race. "Tell the good news, joy to you, we've won," he said, and there he died, breathing his last breath with the words, "Joy to you." This is our job, nothing more, to run the race of Thyself. Christ died on the cross for us. We are to run our race, spreading the good news, and it will be our last race. This is the race of every person who ran before us in the hall of faith. In Hebrews 12 through 14. Therefore lift up your drooping hands, and strengthen your weak knees, and make straight the paths of your feet, so that what is lame may not be put out of joint, but rather be healed. Run like a winner, run like a victor, because Christ has conquered, and we can spread the joy to you to the whole world. If we do that, if we run the race successfully, and I'm not saying that Thyself didn't fall a couple of times. You look at these people in Hebrews 11. Did they fall? Some of them do some disgusting things? Many of them. But they are in the Hall of Fame. That can still be of us too. Christ will clothe our iniquities. And we can be like Paul in one of his last words in 2 Timothy 4, 7 through 8. I have fought the good fight. I have finished my course. I have kept the faith. Henceforth there is laid up for me a crown of righteousness, which the Lord, the righteous judge, shall give me on that day, and not only to me, but all them that love his appearing. So, brothers and sisters, my wish and prayer for every one of us is that we think of those who have gone before us. And as I think here actually at this podium, the men of faith and the women of faith who have preached here, who have talked here. We could go through names. Brother Paul, Hall of Faith. You could say Brother Shuash Kumar, recently gone, Hall of Faith. Can we say these words at the conclusion of our race? And how will the generations behind us look at us? There are many heroes of the faith that are among us here today. This is the center of our church, and there are many that will come after us. How will the generations, how will our children? I think of my grandfather on my dad's side. I didn't know him very much. What would he think if he saw me today? What will Grandpa Pierre think? What would he think of us if he knew our daily lives? What will our children think of us as they look at our lives? It says here in this beautiful song by Steve Green, "Oh, may all who come behind us find us faithful. May the fire of our devotion light their way. May the footprints that we leave lead them to believe, and the lives we live inspire them to obey. Oh, may all who come behind us find us faithful." So my prayer for every one of us is that we look into our lives, that we take these steps, that we run this race, so that we can have not run in vain and have the promise of Christ for our salvation. Thank you.